السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I would like to welcome you all in Asbár, where is knowledge is power. Thanks for Asbár, and thanks for Dr. Fahad Al-Arabi Al-Harthi. Our distinguished guest tonight is Mr. طارق Mansour. طارق is one of Mackenzie's global leaders on citizen-centric government, and he is passionate about enabling private and public sector collaboration to achieve the corporate and national objectives and to capture the shared opportunities of tomorrow. Also, Tariq is passionate about the pressing global humanitarian refugee challenges. And thankfully, he is co-leading Mackenzie's pro bono efforts with refugees. And thank you for this kind of free consulting humanitarian needs. Tariq focuses on the growth and resilience of the private sectors as a major driver of economic growth. Over the last 15 years, he has served private and public sectors clients in North America and Europe and Australia and the Middle East. Tonight, Tariq will speak on the societal changes impacting citizens with particular focus on the disequilibrium between progress and the future outlook. Also, he will zero in on the future of jobs to direct the attention towards the future of jobs. Also, he will discuss the role of companies and governments in embracing the job opportunities of tomorrow. His speech will last for 30 minutes, and after that, a Q&A question, or we can take another question or comments for another 20 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me and welcome Tariq Mansour.
Thank you very much. I want to start with a quick apology. I will do this in English. I apologize, I can't go through it all in Arabic, but I do understand I can speak Arabic, and I will do my best to answer some of the questions, hopefully in Arabic. I'd like to speak to you today about something that has been on our mind for a few years now. This disequilibrium between the speed at which progress is happening and the ability of our society to absorb this progress. As part of this conversation, I will end up zeroing in on one piece of it, and it's only one, which is jobs. And as you know, it's on top of all our minds. It's on top of our minds because I think a lot about these guys and about their future and about what will they be ready for them in a few years. There's a lot of things that are happening very, very quickly that to me are extremely exciting and offer a tremendous opportunity. I'll talk a little bit about this. But there's also a lot of things that are happening that make the bridge between now and that opportunity a bit more complicated. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Before I get started, it's very dangerous to try to predict the future. And so I always try to remind myself, and I go through this exercise myself, and so I'll go through it with you. Who said, I think there's a world market for maybe 5 computers?
The IBM guy.
The IBM guy. Even worse, who said that the phone penetration cell in 2000 would be 900,000 subscribers?
No, don't tell me.
Please tell us.
Bell?
It's actually McKinsey. So needless to say, we were about 2 zeros off. And it's very important to ask why. These are all smart people. Why do we actually get off? And obviously, when it comes to the cell phone, in 1980, the battery power, the battery size, the coverage was all so bad that one would live within your own biases and try to predict the future. It's a very difficult job. So we're going to try to maybe step away a little bit from our own biases. So what will I talk about? I'll talk about 5 things. First, a chapter that I called Feeling Good, Feeling Bad. So I'll talk about what is the global feeling right now. Second, I'll talk about our exciting future. I'll keep this very short. There's a lot of publicity out there on what could be in the future. I'll just very briefly touch on it, just to illustrate what could be. I'll talk about what I dub running across a suspension bridge. You know what a suspension bridge is? Those rope bridges between 2 mountains, and whenever you try to cross them, they're swinging. and sometimes the wind comes up, and this is what it feels like right now. So I'll talk a little bit about how it feels like and what does it take to walk through this bridge. Then I'll talk about the job of creating tomorrow's job, and what do we all be thinking about, creating that, and then I'll zero in on our collective opportunity to participate. The starting point for me, the starting point for us, the people who are doing this research at McKinsey, is that the only way we can get through this bridge is for the public and the private and the social sectors to work together. And I'll talk a little bit about this. Make sense? All right, let's get started. So feeling good, feeling bad. First question, how well are we doing as human beings? I want to see a show of hands. Who says it's a very difficult time for human beings? Okay. And who says it's the best time ever? All right, others? No opinion. Okay. It's actually very, very good news. We have never been, as a human being around the world, in a better place. We have, in the last 25 years, doubled GDP per capita, up to $17,000 per person on average globally. It's a massive number. Literacy rate has doubled in the last 50 years. People below the poverty line, the $1.9 per day of income, has actually halved in the last 30 years. And the mortality under 5 years has also halved in the last 25 years. So all of the indicators are actually very positive when you look at how well we are doing as human beings. So you would think this is actually really, really good. It's very exciting. In addition, by 2025, for the first time in humanity, we're going to cross the 50% consumption line, which means more than half of the population globally is going to reach the consuming class. Consuming class being defined as more than $10 of income a day, which means you have enough money to eat and to spend. This is really good news. So why? Why the unease? Why are societies in a volatile situation? Why the challenges of Occupy Wall Street? Why the referendum? Why Brexit? Why what's happening in the US and society, when you read all the indicators, is happening, this gap and this polarization? Why is it that all of these indicators, where it comes to polarization, to the echo chamber with people only listening to the media that they care about and not challenging the ideas, to the mistrust being at the highest level it's ever been in history, in corporates, in CEOs, in governments, in leaders? Why protectionism? Which we're doing so well and which has served us so well as humanity, why protectionism is on the rise? And why there's such a disillusionment with democracy? Democracy being defined as just engaging. Forget about whether it's a political structure or not. Engaging in society. The engagement rate is so down. So why is this all happening? I will offer 5 drivers of why, what we call the disequilibrium. The first is the rise of inequality and the slowdown of social mobility. I will show some very high-level statistic, but in many, many societies, especially in the developed economies, the fact is that inequality is extremely on the rise and that social mobility is stagnating. The second is that the uneven growth between the haves and the have-nots. So the center of gravity in the world is actually moving. The economic center of gravity. There's places where growth is very, very high and places where it's not happening at all. Third is that governments have not been able to deliver on the social contract. If you look, every single government is under severe debt stress. Every single government is actually trying to catch up with the citizens' needs and the citizens' expectations, because every single government has not reformed both its structure and its policies and its capabilities to keep up with times. Fourth, tech is moving super fast. You all know this. I'll show a couple of statistics just to inform it. But we would submit that society has not absorbed that speed, which means that we as human beings fundamentally have not learned to actually work with the speed that is the tools that are between our hands. Our ability to actually interact in an effective way with these tools has not caught up with times. And finally, this re-questioning of what we call the foundational tenets of society. Foundational tenets, which is things that are for many of us as basic as role of man and role of woman, as role of a family, as family structure between grandparents, parents, and kids. All of these have broken down in such a big speed with people moving to the cities that it's actually creating some really interesting societal human behavior evolution. And so I'll talk a little bit about this. But do not underestimate this number 5. A lot of the research that is happening actually, for example, in the US right now, is what is driving a lot of the political discourse is because of this. When you are in a town where total population is 500 and all of a sudden 1,000 refugees show up, you're a minority in your own town. How do you react to that at this speed? And this is actually happening today, and it's happening super fast. And this drives a lot of this disequilibrium in how people behave and why this big volatility in behavior in society. So I am, in a way, stepping outside what typically we talk about, which is economics, into other fields. We are not pretending that we know all of this. We have some varying degree of expertise in this, but we are trying to frame a dialogue, a global dialogue among experts on these topics. And we're trying to contain this conversation and open up the conversation about it, because we feel that it is critical that we address these issues very fast and that everybody takes the responsibility on these issues. So very quickly, did you know that the number of households with flat and falling income, okay, households that have not basically improved their income level, there are 70% households between 2005 and 2014 in 25 developed economies. Imagine, over 2/3 of society has not seen its income grow in the last 10 years in 25 developed economies. This is a massive, massive number. Did you know that the center of gravity went from Asia, went back, and is coming back? By 2025, it's going to come back to Asia. This is the GDP center of gravity of the world, okay, which is a weighted economic activity. So if you're on the losing end of things, how would you feel? Okay? Did you know that it took the UK 154 years to double its GDP? It took India 16. This is an interesting chart. We're leading right now a global survey of 100,000 citizens in 25 countries. This is the pilot result of it. We did it in 4 countries, Nigeria, India, the UK, and US. And we have an index which we call the Citizen Promoter Score. It's an index that measures the outlook of citizens about the future relative to their outlook today. So if I asked you, what do you think, well, how do you feel about Saudi Arabia in 2030 versus today? How do you feel about it, the future of your kids versus today? And this is the result. This chart, to me, indicates this massive disequilibrium also at the geographic level in the world between the haves and the have-nots. And you can see the nuances at which we need to operate when we're actually addressing these issues. So people like in Nigeria, you see 74-point gap between people who are positive about the future versus today. In the US, 71-point negative gap about the future versus today. Yes, so these are points and percentages are the same. So you'd be, if today people, 20% feel they're actually bad, that'd be minus 20. 50% feel is good, plus 50, that's a 70-point gap. So, we just talked about feeling good, feeling bad. Let's talk a bit about the exciting future. Because the point is that things are going really well, and they're about to go even much, much better. Science and technology are moving really in the positive direction. So I only have a couple of charts here, but you all have your own examples. So we have actually given back land since 1950 in the US of agricultural land. So we're using less land to make more food for more people. Okay? This indicates to me there's a way actually to feed the world. There should be a pretty easy way to feed the world. Okay? A child who's born today is likely to live 150 years. If you actually add all of the technologies that are possible and all the analysis that is possible, it's 150 years. This is a big deal, right? So things are actually really, really good. Now, what is the bridge? So it's about running across the bridge. So we talk about these massive changes, right? We talk about migration and this complex network between the world getting close together, but also borders going up. We talked about education and the very fast change in the skills required. And so do the education system catch up? How quickly will they catch up versus what is actually needed? We will talk a little bit about jobs and how much underinvestment actually went so far in retraining and how much more we need to actually do. I talked a little bit about our capacity to absorb technology. We are 2 to 5 times more likely to interact with technology than we were before. So are we actually ready to manage that And we all, I mean, I know at home, I try to put some limits for my kids, but it's actually really, really hard. I find it super hard. And I don't know, is it good or bad? Is it good that they spend more time on the iPad, or is it bad? I don't know. So one thing that I try to think about, and we try to think about, is if you go back in society, how long is this bridge? How drastic is it? Is it a simple incremental change, or is it a structural, fundamental change that we're going through as a humanity? We tend to believe that it's actually structural. It's structural because not only it's about economic change, it's actually structural because it's also at the societal, at the values. There's actually a tension on values between open and closed, between defining who's like me and who's not like me that is happening at the same time. So one time in society when this actually happened was back right before the Renaissance in Europe, right? Very, very dark period. Very dark period. What came out of it was very, very positive for humanity. And so the point is, will we go through something as dark? And how do we make that bridge short? What do we need to all do together to shorten that bridge? Both locally, but also on a global scale. So we have a list of to-dos. It's a long list of to-dos, but we're working on it. And the point of Asbar, I think, and what I love about it, is that it's a dialogue. It's not a, here's a formula, let's go build it. So I have 2 pages of to-dos. The first one is what we call this acting to cross the bridge, the public sector to-do list. What I've circled are the things that we'll talk a little bit about today from a job. But this is why I called it chapter 1, because there are many chapters that are coming after this. But essentially, this is about meeting the basics, so governments actually ensuring that they're able to meet the basics in this new environment. It's about future-proofing the economies, and I'll talk a little bit what that means. New institutions for new problems. There are a lot of problems that actually don't have a home in the world today. Take the migration problem. There is no reference, right? There are a number of people trying to actually figure it out, but nobody came together and said, we're going to distribute migrants in the following way because it actually makes sense, or we will have a policy about this, a joint policy to do it that way. And building a shared community. This point on community is actually really, really important when you think about the evolving mix and diversity of values, okay? And so, you know, when you think, for example, about the tension in a lot of towns of whether you build a church next to a mosque or a mosque next to a church, this is actually real challenges in the values of society. Same goes with a lot of males, for example, staying at home from work, right? This is actually fundamentally a shift in how we do as a society. So, you know, I have some detail under each one of those. So the first one obviously is about just recapping some of the basic needs of human beings and restructuring it, whether it is through healthcare, moving from you know, fixing to preventing. It is, and you know, let's not talk also about financing of healthcare and how that is required given the massive aging of population in one part of the world and young population in the other part of the world. On future-proofing the economy, you have, you know, all seen a lot of these ideas, but obviously the revising, for example, a lot of the regulatory regimes is necessary. So today, one of the biggest debates is about data privacy. Okay, so what is the law on data privacy, and what is Europe right, which is kind of, let's go extreme protectionism, let's protect it, or is it much, much better to go extremely open on data privacy because it gives the right tools and gives the right transparency for everybody to live safely and to share the right information, etc. So we have a to-do list on the public sector and a to-do list on the private sector. So the private sector also has a major role to play, and this is where I say it is impossible for the private sector, and frankly it doesn't have any of the resources to act on its own. It needs to act with the private sector. And so the do no harm, as in the ability of the private sector to act in a positive way and in a contributing in a positive way. The taking the Hippocratic Oath, for example, being one idea of how every company and every CEO and management and board ought to be with that mindset of what is the role of their private entity. Preparing their future, but also increasing the social impact and their ability to contribute back to society, because this is a close circle between the two. So the job of creating tomorrow's job. Let me just check the clock very quickly. All right, we're doing pretty well. Okay, so I'll shift now and say, okay, we're going to zero in on jobs. As you saw, I could have talked about education, I could have talked about regulation, but I'll talk a little bit about jobs. This is a report that we issued last month. It's a report essentially that looked at it's based on our global work on automation of work. And our global work, what did, took every job, took every activity that a person could do, looked at every activity and whether the automation of that activity is possible today, and came out with a result. The result basically says that over half of the activities could be automated with today's technology. These are the numbers for the Middle East. So basically this says that 4.5 million jobs today, if you decide to, you could automate. Now, what jobs are actually more automatable or not? This is not a surprise to any of you, because obviously the more advanced degrees like lawyers and doctors and teachers are less automatable today, so only 20%, versus the more mechanical jobs, if you will, or routine jobs that are for less than high schools, where it's more than 50%. A bit of a complicated chart, but I thought it was really useful to show you a little bit of the granularity of that work. This is a chart of where jobs will be created, right? There's actually growing demand around the world, and it shows a variety of countries, from the developed to the developing. And you can see that the shades of colors here are all towards the blue. There's nothing that is red where actually we're going to lose a lot of jobs. So see that there's actually going to be a lot of demand for things like care providers, around doctors, nurses, educators, managers, professionals, technology professionals. These are all kind of dark, obviously, in India as India grows, and so does in China, but there's also good shades of blue in the developed countries. Now, this is obviously the challenge. And this challenge, which is all of the routine jobs, including customer service, office support, all of the predictable machining environment, are all going to lose significant number of jobs. They're going to do it pretty quickly. And they've also obviously started to do that, including in China. And so the point is, how many jobs did the PC destroy in the US, do you think? When the PC, when the personal computer actually began to grow, how many jobs did it destroy? I'm sorry? Nothing. We have a nothing. We have zero over there. 50% destruction. Okay. So it's actually a significant increase, right? So it actually created a ton of jobs. This is a chart on the history of job changes in the retail sector in the US. The blue line is actually physical retail. The white line is e-commerce. You can see how the total is actually very positive. Okay? So the point here, again, back to my positive message, which is we are going to create a lot of good things. The question is, how do we get through the transition? How do we get through this transition? These are scenarios for how this could be. This could be as bad as if only 25% employment actually happens in the next 15 years, this could be as bad as unemployment actually doubling. But if we're able to redeploy and make the bridge much shorter, okay, then this could be actually a pretty good thing. We could still be in the 3 to 4% range of unemployment in the US, for example. This obviously are all themes that could apply to our world today, also in the Middle East. So what are people actually doing? These are just 3 simple examples of how people are thinking about this. So if you look at Denmark, Sweden, New Zealand, they have taken some very specific, deliberate, coordinated approaches to job redeployment, which is if somebody gets fired from a job or somebody needs to be taken away from a job, they immediately go through a very deliberate effort to shorten that bridge. So you can see things like in Denmark, it's a very flexible environment, so the regulation allows you actually to shift jobs very quickly. It doesn't stop you from doing so that you're artificially creating a problem. 25% of people actually change their jobs within a year. However, they also pay employment and security up to 90% of their income to the lowest paid, and they have a very active worker support for all the unemployed. If you go, for example, to New Zealand just to see the level of interventions, right? There's a commitment to hire low-skilled staff and to train them to fill vacant positions from people. All the companies that are listed on the stock exchange have actually signed an agreement to redeploy and retrain all of the displaced staff. They actually pledged a zero unemployment out of the change in technology in their companies. This is how aggressive they are. And you probably know all of these companies that are actually from the private sector. So if this is kind of the intervention of the public sector, this is what the private sector is also doing, and it's a very, very high scale. So the point that I'm trying to get to is this, okay? Which is across all of these problems, and including the job automation, the point is we are going towards a positive end of the bridge. But to cross this bridge, there isn't one player, neither the government, nor the private sector, nor the civic society, or the individual, that alone they can actually do this, given the scale of the problem. This requires a new way of actually working together, and a new way of tactically sitting at the table and developing policies that allow each of the players to contribute their own part of the problem. That's all I got. Thank you.